Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 5.4A. I've entitled this video Common Sense. This video is going to cover pages 128 to 131. The Second Continental Congress. In 1774, the Continental Congress agreed to meet again if the British did not address their complaints. In fact, as the battles at Lexington and Concord in 1775 showed, the dispute between the British and the colonies had worsened. Distinguished leaders. The Second Continental Congress met on May 10, 1775. The delegates included some of the greatest leaders in the colonies. Among them were John and Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, and George Washington, all delegates to the First Continental Congress. Several new delegates came as well. Question number 1. What group met on May 10, 1775 in Philadelphia? They were the Second Continental Congress. Question 2. Who are 5 famous delegates that were at the First Continental Congress that came again to the Second? They would be Samuel Adams, John Adams, Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, and George Washington. Benjamin Franklin, one of the most respected men in the colonies, had been a leader in the Pennsylvania legislature. In 1765, he represented the colonies in London and helped win repeal of the Stamp Act. John Hancock of Massachusetts was a wealthy merchant. He funded many patriot groups, including the Sons of Liberty. The delegates chose Hancock to be president of the Second Continental Congress. Thomas Jefferson, only 32, was also a delegate. He served in the Virginia legislature. Jefferson was already known as a brilliant thinker and writer. The delegates at the Second Continental Congress had much to discuss. Though American and British blood had been spilled, they were not ready to vote for a break from Britain. It would be another year before Jefferson would write the Declaration of Independence. Question number 3. What famous Albany Plan creator, entrepreneur, and famous kite flyer represented Pennsylvania at the Second Continental Congress? Benjamin Franklin. Number 4. Who was selected to be the president of the Second Continental Congress? John Hancock. Question 5. What young, brilliant writer and thinker was a delegate for Virginia? Thomas Jefferson. Question 6. Although blood had already been spilled, what was the Second Continental Congress not ready to vote for in May of 1775? A break from Britain. It would be another year plus before that would happen. Key actions. The Continental Congress did take steps to begin governing the colonies. It authorized the printing of money and set up a post office with Franklin in charge. The Congress also formed committees to handle relations with Native Americans and foreign countries. Most important, it created the Continental Army. Unlike local militias, such a force could form and carry out an overall strategy for fighting the British. The Congress unanimously chose George Washington to command this army. Washington was an experienced soldier and a respected Southern planter. He left Philadelphia at once to take charge of the forces in Boston. Now we can answer a couple questions. Question number 7. What were 2 steps the Second Continental Congress took to begin governing the colonies? Number 1, they authorized the printing of money, which you're going to need money to pay for the war. And 2, it set up a post office. You have to have communication, and Benjamin Franklin was in charge of that. Question number 8. What committees did the Second Continental Congress set up? They set up committees to handle relations with Native Americans and foreign countries. You got to be able to have diplomats that can talk with these other groups to make sure that you are doing what you need to do to keep those relations as positive as possible. Question number 9. What was an important military action the Second Continental Congress took? They created the Continental Army, which would be much more effective than just having these separate militias trying to fight individual battles. Question number 10. Who was selected unanimously to be the leader, the general of the Continental Army? That was General George Washington, who, if you've heard stories, he was very tall for that time, and he came to the meetings already dressed in his old uniform that he had from the previous skirmishes with the French and Indian War, so he clearly was fitting the part for the leader of the Continental Army. Question 11. Why was Washington a great choice to serve as the leader of the army? Well, number 1, he already had experience as a soldier. He had suffered defeats in the French and Indian War, so he knew what it was like to fight on the lands of the colonies. And he also was a very respected Southern planter, so he had the respect and he had the experience. The delegates then offered Britain a last chance to avoid war. They sent a petition, or formal request, to George III. Called the Olive Branch Petition, it assured the king that the colonists wanted peace. It asked him to protect the colonists' rights. The king rejected the petition. Instead, he prepared for war. He hired more than 30,000 German troops called Hessians to fight alongside British troops. Question number 12. What does the word petition mean? This is a formal request with people's signatures on it. Question 13. What was the Olive Branch Petition? This was the last best hope the colonists had to try to get peace with King George III. This was their way of saying, we're sorry things have turned out the way they have. Please, we do want peace. We don't want to break away, but we do ask that you protect our rights. Question 14. How did King George III handle the Olive Branch Petition? Not very well. He rejected it outright and said, he's like, nope. Instead, you're going to get the slap in my hand. We're going to war. Question 15. What importance did the Hessians play in the Revolutionary War? Well, these were the paid mercenary troops from Germany, 30,000 of them, and they were paid to fight. And the British not only were arguably the best trained force in the world, now they're getting the Hessians to join alongside them. So you're going to have the very experienced British troops, and alongside them, these Hessian troops from Germany who were paid to also join to fight in this war. The war heats up. Congress learned that British troops in Canada were planning to invade New York. The Americans decided to strike first. A unit of patriots marched north from Fort Ticonderoga and captured Montreal. However, an American attack on Quebec, led by Benedict Arnold, failed. Washington reached the Boston area in July of 1775, a few weeks after the Battle of Bunker Hill. The British held Boston, but Patriot militia ringed the city. Although the size of the colonial force grew every day, Washington realized that the men were disorganized and lacked discipline, the ability to follow strict rules and procedures. Washington began the task of turning armed civilians into soldiers. Washington also needed weapons. He arranged to have dozens of cannons hauled 300 miles from Fort Ticonderoga. Moving the heavy guns was a huge effort, especially in the snow, as you can see pictured here. In March 1776, Washington believed his army was ready to fight. Under the cover of darkness, he moved soldiers and cannons into position overlooking Boston while the redcoats slept. Question number 16. What did Washington quickly realize his troops desperately needed? Well, number one, they needed organization because they lacked discipline. They needed to learn how to follow orders. They needed to learn how to march, how to train, and how to be an efficient fighting force. They also needed weapons, things from muskets to gunpowder to cannons. They needed all this against the British. Question number 17. What move did Washington make that showed he had the military intelligence to be a great general in the Revolutionary War? Well, he is going to use the cover of darkness in March 1776 to surprise the Boston troops that were there for the British. The move surprised the British, who realized they were now within easy reach of Washington's big guns. British General William Howe commanded his soldiers to board ships and withdraw from Boston. On March 17th, Washington led his jubilant troops into the city. They watched as the British troops sailed away to Halifax, Nova Scotia, a part of Canada. Question number 18. What did British General Howe decide to do in response to Washington's bold plan? He packed up his troops into ships and he withdrew to Canada, moving towards independence. Many colonists held on to hope that the colonies could remain part of Great Britain. Still, support for independence was growing. It was inspired in no small part by writer Thomas Paine. Paine arrived in the colonies from England in 1774. He soon caught the revolutionary spirit. In January 1776, he published a pamphlet called Common Sense. In bold language, Paine called for a complete break with British rule. Primary source from Common Sense, 1776. Everything that is right or reasonable pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, "'Tis time to part." Common Sense listed powerful reasons why Americans would be better off free from Great Britain. The pamphlet greatly influenced opinions throughout the colonies. And as you can see on the right here, Common Sense sold 120,000 copies in its first 3 months, and by the end of the Revolution, nearly over 500,000 copies were sold. And that means an estimated 20% of colonists owned a copy of Common Sense. If you were to take that in current day sales, he would have sold 60 million copies. That's incredible. Question number 19. What important pamphlet did Thomas Paine publish in January of 1776? Common Sense, arguably the most important influential pamphlet in American history. Question 20. What was the main point of Common Sense? The main point was we couldn't have this peaceful rejoining of the two sides. We needed to separate and have a complete break with Britain. We needed to be our own country. Question 21. What impact did Common Sense have on the colonies? It persuaded public opinion and moved a lot of people to thinking we should be in Britain's control to we should be a free and independent country. This was a huge propaganda device that really set America's future towards one of independence. Well, thank you for watching. Before we go, of course, I've got something for you. No pain, no gain. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.